People have always lived into old age. Michelangelo lived to the old age of 88, Hippocrates lived to 90, Emperor Augustus to 75, Thomas Jefferson to 83, Plato to 80, Ben Franklin to 84, John Adams to 90, and Thomas Edison to 84. This is true of literally every point in human history. In ancient Rome, men who survived after childhood were expected to live to around 72 years. The life expectancy for men in the United States today, 73. If you wanted to be in Roman office, you had to be at least 43 years of age, almost a decade older than the minimum age of a US president. In 5th and 4th century BC, records indicate that Greek men could expect to live until around 71 years of age, and that's including those who got murdered or executed. Of the men analyzed, around 3 to 4% lived past the age of 100, a number that outpaces even the United States today. In the Victorian period of the mid-1800s, girls who made it past the age of 5 could be expected to live until they were 75, while boys to 73, again right in line with what we see today. Even more striking is that today's working class, with a lifestyle comparable to that of the Victorian era, lived to around 72 years for men and 76 years for women. Data from the Renaissance period shows that the average age of death was in the late 60s, and throughout much of the Middle Ages, people routinely lived into their late 60s and 70s. If we go back even further to our hunter-gatherer prehistoric ancestors, who are often cited as being lucky to live into their 30s, we again see that living 7 decades of life was not uncommon whatsoever. Hunter-gatherers died in bunches from violence or physical injury, not because they didn't have modern science to keep them well into old age. Estimates have consistently predicted a human lifespan of 66 to 78 years based on brain and body weight of our prehistoric ancestors. Using bones as a measure, several Paleolithic-era death trends show a life course similar to those of modern hunter-gatherers. Modern hunter-gatherers who have no access to any of our modern medicine and healthcare have been repeatedly shown to live to approximately 70 years of age if they can avoid natural violence. One study went on to state that the evolved average adult lifespan for Homo sapiens is around 70 years, and thus individuals living long lives in both traditional societies and developed countries is not simply the result of modern medicine and hygiene. Even in the Bible, Psalm 90:10, estimated to be written around 1000 BC, states, "As for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, or if due to strength, 80 years. In other words, it was normal to live into your 70s and considered a good life to live into your 80s, pretty much exactly like today. Of course, we do not have complete records of what happened in ancient times like we do now, but the fact that there are tons of documents showing that it was not uncommon for people to live into old age should make us think. When you hear someone say that people of a given era had a life expectancy in the 20s or 30s, that is an average lifespan. It is true that on average, we probably do live a bit longer today than at most other points in history, but that doesn't mean that our longevity is far superior today. The idea that modern science is the reason people can live past their 30s and 40s into their 70s or 80s now does not hold up. The problem with this is that babies and young children are much more susceptible to dying in the conditions of the past than they are now. Throughout all of human history up until very recently, child and infant deaths were by far the biggest problem that we faced. Infant mortality has been estimated to be over 30 times greater among hunter-gatherers, while early childhood mortality is over 100 times greater, and late childhood mortality is about 80 times greater. I mean, throughout most of history, children were literally more likely to die than they were to survive. This is a great achievement of the modern world that should not be dismissed, but it does not mean that it was normal for people to die in their 30s. People who did make it past childhood had lives nearly identical to what we do today. In fact, an estimated 85% of the variation in lifespan can be explained simply by the fact that newborns died at a much higher rate. Essentially, if you had 2 babies born but one died in the first few months of their life, while the other lives until age 80, the average lifespan is only 40 years. But that doesn't mean that you are expected to live until 40 years of age. This is a problem that has dragged down our average lifespan for all of history, but again does not indicate that we were reaching our natural end in our 30s. If we look at the 1950s United States, despite the average age of death sitting in the mid-60s, over half of people made it past the age of 70 and over a quarter of people made it past age 80. However, you are 5 times as likely to die in the first year of life, which massively drags down the average lifespan. Another huge issue is that as humans continue to advance technologically, we caused more problems than we solved, which did negatively impact our lifespans at different points in history. Populations blossomed, transportation advanced, and people could get food without farming, hunting, or gathering it themselves. Due to this, people started living in more densely packed communities and cities, which made it much easier for pathogens to spread, so infections were the biggest problem humanity faced throughout most of the past 1,000 years. The advent of agriculture led to foods being more refined and less diverse, and we didn't realize that these diets lacked essential nutrients until the early 20th century. Our technology also made it much easier to kill each other before we would have gone naturally. Above all, newborn babies are very susceptible to environmental conditions and died at exceedingly high rates. All of these factors dragged down the average lifespan at different points in history, creating the illusion that humans maxed out at much younger ages until very recently. In reality, humans have always lived into old age. Can we really call it progress if increases in life expectancy were mainly due to solving problems that humans caused in the first place? On the other hand, there have been a number of modern interventions that have actually led to fewer deaths from causes that dominated most of history. The advent of antibiotics crushed many bacterial infections that would have wiped out tons of people in the past. Improvements in the sanitation of communities and food meant we weren't exposed to such a high load of microbes. The discovery of essential nutrients allowed us to both prevent starvation and malnutrition through efficient food production. As technology and housing advanced, we became much safer from the physical threats of nature and poorly intentioned people. Emergency care has improved. If you get hit by a car, stabbed, or ingest a poison, you'll be kept alive, whereas you might have been left for dead in the past. We've drastically cut down on cigarette smoking, coinciding with a drop in lung cancer and heart disease. While all of this is great, it doesn't mean that our modern lifestyles and medicine have doubled how long we're capable of living. In reality, it tells us that the vast majority of modern healthcare interventions have been at best useless. Most so-called advancements have done next to nothing to improve our health and may have done more to worsen our health, even if our average age might increase. In fact, life expectancy across several developed countries has been plateauing for the last decade and has even declined over the last few years. One would expect that with more money and research being poured into biomedical science than ever before, that we should continue to see improvements, but that just isn't the case. We put out more drugs and information than ever, yet it doesn't seem to be moving the needle. More action has not corresponded to more results. Ultimately, the real question is, do we have a better health span now? Are we living more, or are we simply staying alive a bit longer on average? Well, people are reportedly less happy than ever, spend less time in social situations, less time sleeping, and more time on the internet. While we've done a great job at avoiding infections and violence, we are more sick than ever with a different type of illness, chronic metabolic disease. You might hear that it's because we are living older that we are having more of these chronic diseases. While it is true that your risk of getting any of these conditions is higher as you age, the rates of younger people getting these health problems is going up as well. Incidence of cancer and Alzheimer's disease continues to rise regardless of age, and childhood obesity is an epidemic that needs no introduction. To put it simply, you may be more likely to die from a chronic disease because we've prevented other causes of death, but you're more likely to get a chronic disease now than ever before, even at a young age. One group of researchers, after finding out that Victorian-era individuals lived just as long as we do today, stated 20th century healthcare has not so much enabled us to live longer, but has predominantly supplied methods of suppressing the symptoms of non-communicable degenerative diseases. But what if we had all of the benefits of our modern advancements and also had lifestyles and interventions that protected us from chronic disease? That is what we are aiming to do with our health consulting platform, Prism. If you're interested in getting some personalized help to optimize your health and well-being, click the top right of the screen here or the link in the description for your first free consultation. So on average, you probably will live longer today than before, but that's certainly not because we have some kind of supernatural longevity from our modern lifestyles. If anything, that seems to be at the root of our problems. Don't let them fool you. Subscribe to our channel.